Yes.
All right, thanks. So, scaling value from IIoT, scene 3. All right, welcome back to our series on how to generate value from IIoT solutions. And in this scene 3, we will talk about the replicate challenge. So, in the previous two sessions, we were talking about what does it take to generate value from IIoT. You need a use case, you need to build a solution against that, and the last element is you need to be able to replicate it in a production network, in your plants, in your customer base. Now today we will talk about this challenge here. So how can I get out an IoT solution I built once, tested it, POC'd it, so proof of concept is running. But what is the challenge, or how do we actually, what is required to replicate it in different production lines? In other words, if I can't solve that, I will always be in a POC kind of IoT state, which of course doesn't deliver the value add at scale that I'm targeting for. Now, the first question in order to answer, so what does it take to replicate, or what are the challenges there, is the question, so what do I do when I build up an IoT solution? Now, the IoT solution is targeting a use case, and in the last session we talked about how to define a use case, how to enable your experts to contribute. And we talked about that a use case is basically a target value add. So, a target value add element describing what is actually the problem I want to solve, which value I want to generate, what is the KPI I want to improve. Now, the target value add is influenced by value drivers, right? So, typically, it's not just I can change the target value or generate the target value, it's that there are certain elements required to be influenced. So, let's take an example, OEE, for example. Quality, uptime, availability, these three value drivers together formulate an OEE target, and of course I need to somehow influence these value drivers. Then the next element is there is no value add generated versus what is already there in the field if you don't change a process or people behavior. So it's people and process change that needs to be implemented or enabled by the IoT solution. This of course needs to influence some value drivers that then again generate the target value. And as an input for the use case, I provide assets, data sources, so something that can be picked up by an IoT solution and be analyzed and prepared in a manner that it then drives people and process change. Now this was the use case that we talked last time, right? So the green elements are the use case. Now, what happens then in step 2 of our circle, so when we are here, that your IoT team, your IT department, your experts start to build a technological stack that pick up the inputs and convert it along a structured manner, methodology, technological stack, into something that drives the people and process change. Now what are the typical elements of your IoT solution stack? So an asset and data sources, sensors, but also other software data sources like CMMS systems, they basically send the data via an edge element, potentially, via communication path, I would say. Put the data onto edge and communication path to send it to a central, for example, infrastructure as a service, right? So cloud, or combined with an operating system running there, so an IoT operating system, which are out there in the market. So assets, data sources send via edge and communication devices data to a central storage place. Now, on the storage place, there's a certain data model implemented, so there's something that makes this data usable for algorithms and IT. Then we might have some data cleansing involved and some AI, artificial intelligence algorithms, calculating the data, analyzing the data, making predictions, for example. And the results are, of course, exposed via a user interface or a process interface, right? So this is something where the operators, for example, would see the result of the analysis of the solution, or you directly ingest some information into any process which then changes behavior. Now these are the elements of an IoT stack which is built in order to address the green use case, right? Of course all these elements need to be somehow interwoven, right? So it's a modular technological solution with clearly defined interfaces and built up in a modular manner so that you also can change it in a very dynamic manner. Now this is an IoT solution, right? So the combination of these different elements is the IoT solution. And if we built that and tested it and technically integrated it and you see the results, then we can say, yeah, so the IoT solution is there. Now in order to really benefit from this IoT solution beyond the one installation you just built and tested is you need to replicate it. It means this stack needs to be installed in all the different sites or in your customer base, in the different assets, on the machines, which have the same use case to be addressed, right? So it's a replication. This stack needs to go onto different implementations, installations. Now what happens if you then go out in the field and go from your first plant, for example, to your plant N, depending on how many you have, to install it with the same challenge, then you find out that actually this stack you just built technically doesn't necessarily fit one-on-one into all the different setups you have in the different sites in your installations. So let's talk about the assets and data sources, for example. Now, depending on how well standardized your sensor standard is or how well standardized your asset base is, you can replicate this one-on-one, right? But typically you have a different firmware version running, the plants are not standardized on the sensor standard, so some are using Siemens sensors, one are using Rockwell sensors. So this, to replicate one-on-one, is, I would say, not trivial, right? So it's not plug and play. You have to customize something, typically. Edge communication devices, similar. One plant has a Profibus communication network, another one has a different technology. One plant has a bandwidth available, the other not. So again, depending on the site you want to install it, you have to do some adaptations of the solution. Now the infrastructure as a service where you want to store the data, of course that can be standardized. As a company you can decide we use Azure or AWS as our infrastructure as a service standard. But if you're a machine builder and you address different customers, this is a challenge because each customer typically has already decided for a certain infrastructure where the data goes to. So I would say it depends a little bit on the scenario, but this definitely is also not one-on-one replicable. It needs to be adapted to your customer base at least, for the end customer. So for a company that wants to roll it across different sites, maybe this can be standardized easy. But again, it's not just plug and play. Data model then of course follows the logic below, because if I have a different infrastructure, this will also mean I need to adapt my data model or at least replicate the data model for my solution as an OEM. Or I can, as a global standard, if I manage to get a global standard through, as an end customer in my production network can reuse it. Similarly, cleansing and AI, this all is connected, right? So if I have a different data model or I need to adapt the data model to a customer standard, then this is difficult. Now, the user interface, that's an interesting question, because at the end of the day, what the algorithm delivers needs to be now exposed to something that then drives the people and process change. Now, people and process changes are, of course, highly customer or site dependent, typically. So you rarely find a global standard for doing maintenance. Maybe there's a standard framework, but the implementation of how it is done, of course, needs to be according to your European plant or to a Chinese plant. I mean, there are many regulations or boundary conditions to be followed. So this, for sure, is something where then the UI needs to adapt to, and this can be going from, I mean, I need to really adapt it to a local site, or I can reuse elements of a standard UI and just do customization, but at the end of the day, it's not plug and play. The same again for process and people, right? I mean, this is definitely highly location dependent. And then I would say the same for value drivers, so it's not the same. I mean, it needs to adapt to the site and maybe also the target value definition. I mean, there are similarities and KPIs like OEE, for example, they are well defined. So there's a standard for that, but the concrete implementation definition of the target value typically changes a bit. So that is your picture, right? So you have one standard built up, technologically integrated, works very well in your plant 1, But if you want to replicate it, you have all these questions, right? So how do you adapt to my firmware version? How do I adapt to my communication network and protocol? How is the data model? Does it fit to my standard, which I have locally here as a customer? How can you make sure that the user interface drives my process and people change in order to generate target value add? So what is happening then, if you want to scale, you need to somehow be able to very simple and effectively managing these solution variants from a standard solution down to the local installation on the different plants. Now this is something which of course needs to happen in a highly scalable manner. If you send in service teams every time you want to install a solution, which then does again customize, program, integrate, to basically the whole stack again from bottom to top, this will not scale and will not deliver the use case and the value add in the business case that you want to have. And that's now the real challenge, in our opinion, in order to replicate, in order to scale IoT. How do I build a solution stack which can be modified for the different sites, and how can I effectively manage the implementation of these solution variants? And this is of course part of one of the next series and scenes where we talk about how you can solve that. And with that, I leave you for the next scene. We're looking forward to that. This is the challenge, how to replicate it, and looking forward for the next scene. Thank you very much.